This meeting is being recorded.
All right. How is everyone doing today? Going to give folks a few minutes to join. Thank you for those who already joined. Appreciate that. We know everyone's got a very busy day today. All right. Where's everybody coming in from today? I am personally tuning in from Charlotte, North Carolina. Feel free to drop in the chat where you are joining in from today. Oh, we got Philly in the building. New Jersey, okay. Ooh, Milwaukee, okay. Texas, all right. I like it. All right, in the next couple minutes, as some more folks join, we'll go through some general housekeeping. Again, my name is Chase Friesman. I'm one of the folks here on the SEO marketing team. There's a good chance that you received an email invite from me. And if you did, I look forward to connecting with you after. Oh, we got Katie from London. Very excited, Katie. Thank you for joining and presenting today. Looking forward to that. All right, I'll give folks about one more minute here before we jump in. All right. It is gorgeous today in Charlotte. I hope it's nice where everybody else is today. For those of you that are here, if you take a look at the bottom of your Zoom browser, you'll see there is a Q&A section. Feel free to drop any questions you have throughout the presentations there for our panelists, and they will be sure to answer them live. At the end, we're going to leave about 10 minutes. All right, about another 30 seconds, and then we're going to jump right in. Appreciate everyone for being patient. I am very happy with how many people are attending live today. As everyone knows, these are recorded, so you will receive this in your email inbox right after the webinar today. All right. All right. So we are going to get started. So thank you all for joining today. Let's go over what we're going to expect in the next hour. So before we jump in, you are going to hear from our two senior members from our SEO team here at SEER. We have Katie Leary, our senior SEO manager, live from London. And we also have Allison Hahn on our technical SEO lead. Quick reminder, this is recorded in case you have to jump early or happen to miss anything. Also, check your inbox later for the video and a copy of this presentation. We'll also be providing some specific resources in that follow-up as well. We're going to leave the last 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. And what's really exciting is today we're going to be covering some business challenges, some different solutions and opportunities. Let's jump right in.
Awesome. Thanks, Chase. Excited to get started. But first, let's talk about some background just to ground us in where we're at as we head into our international talk today. So here at SEER, we make sure that every single division from search to creative opens a data set before we open our mouths. So we're not just trusting our guts, we're going off of the data. So in our discussions today, just know that we're rooting these recommendations, these insights, and these past client examples from what we've seen in our data analysis. So what business challenges are we going to be tackling today? First and foremost, you're expanding internationally. Where do you start? Let's lay some frameworks here. Next, we'll get into how you reach your target audience via search in these different markets. And then lastly, once we know our target audience and our target region, how do you optimize your site for international SEO to see that success you're ultimately hoping for? So why should you expand internationally? What's the ROI here? As of January 2021, there were 4.66 billion active internet users worldwide. That's about 60% of the global population, and it's only growing. There's a huge opportunity to go after not only consumers in what you would consider your domestic market, but outside those regional barriers as well. So as I was putting together this presentation and really thinking about the work that I've done in terms of international SEO, I really resonated with an experience that I just went through. And a lot of the challenges I've seen with my client, I went through firsthand with my recent international move. So how do they relate? What does this look like? A few months ago, I decided there was an opportunity for me to live abroad and experience more of the world. That could be your starting point for your company as well. You're deciding that you want to start to move abroad and expand your horizons internationally. So to start my journey, I began by assessing the pros and cons of each location, which was going to make the most sense for me. And ultimately, you do the same for your business as well, based off of different criteria that matter to you. I ended up choosing London, live from London here today, as my home abroad as I made my move. So ultimately, you'll be deciding as well which country is going to make the most sense. But once that decision is made, the real work begins. It's really easy to choose somewhere, land, and go about your everyday life like you would domestically. However, that's not going to be the most fruitful experience for your business or for me as well. So I began by conducting my own audience research, from looking at Reddit threads and chatting with locals, to really understand how to live my best life here in London, and for your business, how to see the most success with those consumers that are local to the region. And then ultimately, you start putting those learnings into practice. You start optimizing your day-to-day to live like a local, or update your website to make sure that you're attracting those local customers. For example, you may think that I'm just wearing a normal sweater, but ultimately here in London, I'm wearing a jumper. And that hazy IPA I would treat myself to after this webinar is actually going to be a Guinness. So ultimately, we're striving for success here. So let's get into how we can achieve that with some solutions and opportunities for your business. So getting started with that first business question, you're expanding internationally, where do you start? So this is where you see that opportunity for your business, but you're unsure of where to begin. How do I prioritize efforts and resources to ensure that I'm seeing the most return on my investment? To develop an international website presence, there's a few things that you're going to want to consider and some starting points to really make sure that you're hitting the mark. First and foremost, research and understand your international landscape. What your strategy is going to be for different markets abroad is not going to be a similar cookie cutter strategy that you may use in your domestic markets. Second, establish your SEO strategy and goals. Ultimately, you're going to want to make sure that your efforts are laddering up to a bigger picture. Third, you're going to implement or optimize your international on-page presence. And lastly, measure that success and advancements over time. So considerations for going global are similar between what I had considered for my personal move as well. So just tying that back, again, some of the considerations that I had to think about in making my move included, do I know the language, or do I have means to translate? That's going to be something your business is going to want to consider as well. Do you know the language or have means for translation outside of something that is automated? We want to stay away from that, and we'll get into some of those reasons later. Do you know the culture, have means to learn? Living in London and living in India would be very different for me. Similarly for your country as well, or for your business as well, there's going to be different cultural considerations you're going to want to take into account. For me, I wanted to think about, do I have any existing friends or family in the region, where your business may consider if you have any existing employees or customers in that region already. And lastly, will it be difficult for me to travel or commute in the region? And for your business as well, is it going to be difficult to deliver your products or services in this region? Just some things to keep top of mind as you're considering expansion. So when you're thinking about how do I consider this audience, where do I go to figure out what my footprint currently looks like or what could it be? Start by evaluating your analytics platforms. What countries are currently bringing in traffic or conversions? Do you think that these countries could increase with a dedicated site or subfolder? Next, we'd want to look at competitors and assess where they're seeing international success as well. Does it make sense for you to try to get a piece of the pie? How saturated is the current market? Is being a trailblazer in another market a better option? Really take the time to look at who you would consider your competition and what they're currently doing in the space, if anything at all. This is really going to help round out some additional research and information, and you can learn from others' mistakes. So really take a second to look at what that performance looks like in different areas. And next, root yourself in what markets are going to have the most search potential based off of keyword volume. But it's really important to note that this might not always just be in English. This could be other languages as well. Take those into consideration. You're going to want to think about working with in-language specialists and, again, utilizing those competitors to understand what they're currently ranking for in this region. What piece of the pie exists, and what does this search market look like as a whole? Some keywords that you may be ranking for in the US may not even be relevant in these international markets. So it's really important to make sure that we're capturing all in-language opportunities in this research. So just to round out this section here, some key takeaways: utilize existing data to assess your market opportunity, assess competitor performance to evaluate the potential, and lastly, identify search trends and keyword performance for key topics and content that you may want to pursue. All right, so now let's say that you've identified your target region. Now, how do you reach them? How do you reach that target audience via search in different markets? You're going to want to consider both qualitative and quantitative data in your research. What do we mean by that? Let's get into it. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we're keeping culture at the forefront of this qualitative and quantitative research, really grounding ourselves in the cultural aspect of our move. Remember, it's not going to be a one-to-one match with your US audience, so these additional considerations are important. I do want to take a second to highlight Spotify as a company that has gotten it right. They have a huge global footprint and they take language and cultural nuances into account. They're not just basing their recommendations off of what works for their domestic US audience. It goes beyond their favorited genres and instead looks at habits and lifestyles that people share all over the world. So by combining this qualitative and quantitative data for a complete assessment, it really allows us to take a holistic approach to developing our international strategy. As we mentioned in the previous section, you want to start by analyzing current behavior. Review those site metrics and quantitatively understand what this behavior looks like. But we want to take this a step further and begin to investigate unique needs. So interview target customers to understand their needs. Listen for cultural nuances like different verbiage, perhaps beliefs and social habits that ultimately will ladder up to a successful marketing strategy or an unsuccessful marketing strategy. And unfortunately, there have been plenty of those examples as well where these nuances have not been taken into account. And then lastly, again, developing solutions to measure impact. So we want to make sure that we're always tying our efforts back to goals that we establish. And we have that North Star as we're thinking about all of this research that we're taking the time to complete. So now thinking about audience insights and how we can conduct some research and what are the benefits of doing so. Qualitative research can reveal what your data may not. It's really great to have those foundational bricks laid, if you will, from some of the tips that we highlighted in our previous section. However, how do we take this a step further to know and really understand our audience? In this example here, we're thinking about different goals, and again, trying to better understand how we can ladder up to meet these goals. So in this example here on the left, we're trying to increase webinar attendance. However, webinars were not offered at times outside of EST and PST, which completely did not allow for an international audience to attend. So in talking to these customers, we were able to understand why attendance was low, which we might not have seen just in terms of volume around searches for this webinar. Additionally, again, relating back to time zone differences, we wanted to increase sales and form completions. However, some international customers were hesitant to do so unless they were able to talk to someone. However, at the time, there was no one available to speak because of time differences. So in order to take these things into account, we want to make sure that we're really talking to this audience to understand their needs and desires. Qualitative research also helps you understand the small details that matter to your audience. So in this example here, one of our clients who sells decking really wanted to increase sales in Australia. However, we were totally missing a key factor that mattered to this audience, which was a fire resistant rating. So you'll see in that table on the right here that these keywords that in Australia were being searched a ton that are related to fire resistant decking and ratings were completely off our radar when it came to what we were searching for in the US. So by talking with the audience and understanding what they were looking for, we were better able to target website copy to ensure we were reaching this audience. Additionally, things like user testing can help with quality control. We want to try to make sure that native speakers are reviewing whenever possible as well. So things like this don't fall through the cracks. We found that our client's product name may not translate well, not well at all, in fact, in different markets outside of the US. So when a site is machine translated or carbon copied, instances like this are extremely common, where copy just does not translate correctly for the region and it causes a not ideal user experience on the site. So it's really important that during this testing, copy is reviewed. And this all ladders up to that audience research and audience insights journey. That's really important to consider while you're building out your international strategy. Where this data gets even stronger is when it's coupled with quantitative research. So what's going to be important as you're thinking about your further assessment of the search landscape is the target region that you're moving into. So here at SEER, what we do is it's called a regional landscape assessment. This can be done across the board. At its core, we utilize organic and paid data at your disposal to determine the current visibility of your site as well as your competitors. So this helps us to inform strategy around site structure, content focus, and overall, what the current landscape for success could look like. It helps us to uncover different vernacular that's successful in the region, as well as how the comparisons may differ from your main market. Another component of the international regional landscape assessment is what we would call a gap analysis. So this is where we take that first assessment just a step further to really understand where there's a gap in the current content that is being offered in this region and how our client or your business can really go after that gap to gain visibility, especially as you're entering a new market. So the inputs of this analysis are the same. What you're going to want to do is review that target region using organic and paid data if it's available to assess visibility. And for this analysis specifically, since we're thinking about content, feel free to dig into different products or specialty service areas that you may want to really see success in and start to build out in a more robust way. This will help you determine those content gaps and, again, pursue that visibility on the search engine for your given country, ultimately, usually Google, but we don't want to make assumptions. And then ultimately, this will allow you to uncover target keyword opportunities for content recommendations. And this could be for existing pages or new pages as well, depending on what your strategy is ultimately going to uncover. So just an example of what this could look like. It's definitely very cyclical. As I mentioned, you can do this for specific target areas, different product lines, different services, to really zero in on what's going to provide the most value for your business. Start by identifying that relevant keyword set. Utilize this to examine competitor and customer websites to ensure that we're choosing keywords in the proper dialect. So you're going to want to not only go based off of what you know from your domestic market, but expand upon that, again, as we mentioned earlier, by really growing that keyword set based off of what you're seeing success in for competitors. From there, people also ask results, related searches, etc., to expand that keyword list and identify competitors outside of what we would consider our direct competitors from a business standpoint. It's really important to think about search as a whole in this specific example. Identify competitors that are in the top 20, domains that appear for these specific keywords, and then utilize all of this data to create a comprehensive dashboard or document to really visualize these opportunities to set you up for success. So pairing these insights with audience research, again, really helps to further qualify the opportunities that you want to pursue. In this example here, for one of our SaaS clients, we coupled audience research with a content gap analysis specifically to understand where we should be dedicating resources to expanding our strategy. So in this instance, GDPR we found was really important for customers in the German market. This is something that first and foremost they're going to look for that information on when they arrive at a specific website. And that was something that was missing. We really didn't have a robust content strategy around GDPR. So when we found that information in the audience research, coupled with the gaps that we found in content related to GDPR in our research from what competitors were doing, we were able to come really informed to our client and ensure that our strategy was sound to really kick us off on the right foot with creating a dedicated international strategy for this site. So some key takeaways for this section specifically: remember, there needs to be an intersection of qualitative and quantitative data in your strategies you're putting forth. When possible, talk directly to your target audience or boots on the ground to gain a better understanding for cultural nuances. And lastly, utilize your data at scale to look objectively at potential and current search trends. All right, so now we have our target region and we understand what we need to do to reach our target audience. You've done the work. Now let's put this information into practice to ensure that you're not competing with your US site or your domestic site. And before we get into monitoring this performance, it's important that we ground ourselves in why having your international site set up properly is important and ultimately worth the investment. In this example here, a client came to us with a really common problem. My US site is outranking, in this case, my Canadian site. How do you make it go away? We don't want it showing up. We want consumers going to the Canadian site. Unfortunately, like many SEO challenges, there's no magic wand to make unwanted search results disappear. The world would be a lot easier if that was the case, but however, it's not. But because the client was willing to put in the work and make the investment, they ultimately saw the results and they speak for themselves. So it really is worth taking the time to ensure that you're creating a site that's meant for the people that you're reaching out to. When you think about it, as a US consumer, Let's say you were visiting a German product or a site for a German company, you would be totally thrown off if you viewed that content and it read weird or it was in German. Making sure that you're catering your experience to the customers that it's meant for really goes a long way. So what are some signs that your content is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, or your site structure? Here are some tips. If you're seeing lack of clicks or impressions from Google Search Console, or perhaps limited keyword visibility in your target region, coupled with low traffic and conversions, your site could be under optimized. This could signal there may be something wrong. Start by checking your Google Analytics data. Again, if you're seeing a split across countries coupled with traffic declines, this, among other things, could signal an hreflang issue. So you're going to want to make sure that you're checking your sources to understand and diagnose the problem. Another area to check is your keyword rankings. Is your site struggling to rank in a target locale? In this example here, you'll see an Australian site at the top with a USA or domestic site at the bottom. We really struggled to rank for a period of time, and you'll see that the US site was really owning that priority real estate up until about December of 2017, which is when we diagnosed the issue and made the switch. Which right after that, you can really see the Australian site take off and those rankings decrease for the US site, ultimately, again, showing the importance of making sure your site is set up for success and optimized. I am no tech SEO expert though, so I'm going to turn things over to Allison to just talk us through a bit more the importance of setting up your site for success internationally.
Great, thanks, Katie. All right, let's jump into talking about international domain structures. So as you can see here, there's 4 different options. You can also mix and match options, but we'll just go through the standard definitions for each one of these before we kind of jump into additional details. So the first one up here is CCTLD, which stands for Country Code Top Level Domain. So traditionally, CCTLDs utilize a 2-letter code that will tell search engines and users where a website is registered and where it should be targeting. So in the example below, you can see example.com.mx, which stands for Mexico. So if this were to be some similar setup to how your website would be set up, it would be targeting users in Mexico. The next one is a subdomain. So this is where your international content is hosted on a separate child domain that is rooted off of your root domain. So in the example below there, you can see mx.example.com. The next one is a subdirectory. So this is where international content is hosted on your root domain, but within a subfolder. So in the example there, you can see example.com/mx. And lastly, this is when international content is hosted also on the root domain, but with a parameter appended at the end. However, this method is not recommended by Google due to sending very low location signals to search engines. All right, let's compare all the options. We did not include parameters within this table. As mentioned previously, that is not a recommended method, so we don't need to get into too many details there. So before establishing any of your international domains, it's critical to ensure that the technical structure of your domain fits within the strategy of whether you're trying to target a region, a language, or both. So looking at CCTLDs from a country or location targeting standpoint, that is usually very strong. Typically, if you are using a proper ISO country code, it will help automatically target the region or allow Google to help automatically target the region that you are intending to target your audience for. If you do decide not to use a standard 2-letter code, for example, let's say we do example.mexico, you would have to go in and manually either target that through something like Search Console or utilize hreflang in order for Google to understand where you're targeting. From a language targeting standpoint, CCTLDs, we bucketed that under medium to low. Again, these are traditionally more used if your main goal is to target a specific country. Overall, as far as maintenance and costs that goes, these are usually fairly high since they are technically hosted as almost a separate domain rather than living off of your main root domain. And same thing as far as authority goes, since it is technically considered almost a separate domain, you're not going to benefit from the overall authority of your root domain that has likely been existing for quite some time now. Jumping into the next column, which is subdomains. As far as overall country targeting, that is fairly medium there. Again, that ccTLD is usually the best fit if you're trying to target a specific country or region. Language targeting is also medium there. Again, there's no major strong signals that we're sending to Google by using a subdomain from a language standpoint, but again, it's definitely something that can still be done and is commonly done. Similar to ccTLDs, the maintenance and overall cost is fairly high here. Again, this is hosted separately from your root domain, so it may have a different tech stack or may have a different development team that's working and managing that site. And then again, with authority, very similar to ccTLD, Google looks at subdomains fairly different than they look at your root domain, so it's not going to benefit from the overall authority of your root domain. And then lastly, looking at subdirectories, as far as country targeting, that one's medium as well. Language, this is usually more commonly used for languages. So again, if your main goal is to target languages, a subdirectory may be the best option for you. Overall maintenance and cost is relatively low because it is living off of your root domain. So a lot of times you already have your root domain live and established, and it's simply adding additional folder structures off of that existing domain. And then from an authority standpoint, you can, in this case, benefit from the overall authority backlinks that you've built to your domain over time. Those international pages will benefit from those since it is hosted on the same domain. All right, let's talk about how to maximize our international content accessibility from a technical lens. So these are some bullet points that just highlight some typical things that we will see or recommend for our clients as they're working on their overall tech stack setup for their international pages. So make sure that every international page is hosted on its own unique URL, so it's crawled and indexed by search engines. You are going to want to avoid any scripts that will show your international content on the same URL as something else. So for example, if we have example.com/en-gb, whenever the content changes to something maybe in Spanish, that URL should change and create a unique URL rather than just having that content dynamically load on that exact same URL. Also, you're going to want to make sure to self-canonicalize URLs. So any URL that you want crawled and indexed by search engines should contain a self-referencing canonical tag, just like we would for any of our other non-international content. Then lastly, avoiding auto redirects. A very common practice that we see is IP redirection based on a user's location or IP address. The reason that this is typically not recommended is due to Google entering your site from a US IP address. So since Google is entering as almost a US user, they may get auto redirected only to the US content and not be able to see your international content. Oftentimes this will lead to indexation issues, or it could also create confusion with users who may be traveling or have been accidentally redirected based on their IP address, and they're not able to get back to the content that they're able to understand or that they're looking for on your site. All right, hreflang is a major component when we're talking about international SEO. So let's go over the basics here. What is hreflang? So hreflang is an attribute that signals to Google to let them know what international version of your page is most relevant to a user based on their language and or location. So if you can see in the image here on the right, it's demonstrating a search bot with an American flag. We're also looking at things like Canada, the UK, as well as Australia. All these countries have speakers in English languages. So if we're not giving Google any indication as to where these users or where this content should be targeted at, how are they supposed to know which version to serve to different users? So this is where hreflang becomes very handy. There are 3 ways that you can implement the hreflang tags. However, you are only going to want to choose one, which we'll dive into here in a little bit. Common examples of when you would want to use hreflang. So when your website has a fully translated version, when your website has different versions in the same language and targeting different countries, or when your website has different versions in different languages targeting the same country. So this third bullet is kind of representative of the example image here with the 4 different countries, but targeting essentially the same language. So as far as hreflang implementation options, there are three standard options for how you want to implement these tags. So the first one is on page. So within the HTML head section of the page, you can implement these tags. The second option is in the HTTP header. So this is more commonly used for non-standard HTML content, so something like PDFs. And then the third option is within an XML sitemap. So instead of using the markup on the page, you can create and submit international information within an XML sitemap. Let's compare our hreflang implementation methods here. So on page, again, it goes in the head section of HTML documents. Some pros around this are that CMS platforms can support automation here. So a lot of platforms will now have built-in customizations for how you can scale hreflang across a website. However, some cons are that it could create a lot of HTML overhead for a large amount of URLs. So if you're adding and removing pages very frequently on your site, you also have to make sure that you're updating the hreflang tags for all of those pages, as well as the reciprocals, which could create a lot of overhead. Jumping into XML sitemaps, these are best used for, when you might not have a ton of control over individual pages, or if, again, this might be an easier implementation method from a development standpoint. So some pros here is it's typically fairly easy to upload and maintain. However, some cons are there could be debugging challenges or size limitations for very large websites. And then sitemaps may not be as crawled as often as on-page or header options. So if you do make updates to pages, remove them frequently, or add pages frequently where the hreflang would need to be updated, it may just not be seen as quickly as if the tags were to be on the page itself. And then lastly, HTTP headers. Again, these are most commonly used for non-HTML files such as PDFs. Pros is they're crawled often by search engines. Cons is they may be difficult to debug, as some SEO tools don't pull in the header information reliably or as often as something like on-page or XML sitemap methods. Right, so the next two slides, we're going to jump into talking about some specifics for the implementation methods for on-page as well as XML sitemaps, as these are the two more commonly used methods for hreflang. So one thing to remember and important requirements is you're going to want to add the hreflang tag to the head of every page if you're using the on-page implementation method. So every alternate language version of that page will need to have a tag. If two pages both don't point to each other, the tags will be ignored by Google and your hreflang will essentially be ignored altogether. If there is not an international reciprocal of a page, the hreflang tag should not be added to just one singular version of the page. You will only need hreflang if there is an international version of the page or of the content. So in the example you can see here, we have a US version, a UK, and Australian version. All three of these tags below would be what we would place within the head HTML of every single page. All the tags across all three of the pages would be the exact same. If you notice within the code example, you can see something labeled at the bottom known as an X default attribute. So this signals to Google that this page doesn't target any specific language or locale and would be the default or fallback for users that may be coming in from a country that's not offered as one of the options on the website. So let's say a English speaker from Mexico comes in, there's no Mexico website. We only have UK, Australia, and US. The X default would tell search engines to send that English speaking user who's residing in Mexico to the US version of the page. Then secondly, jumping into the XML sitemap option. So a couple of requirements here. Each URL element must include a loc indicating the page URL. So if you can see in the green highlights there, we have an example of the English US version of the URL. And then every URL element must also list an alternative version of the page, including itself. So similar to the on-page tags, with the XML sitemap, you're going to basically list it out very similarly by including the URL itself, as well as its alternate version, and including each one of those. So as you can see within the code, the first one is listing in the green, the English US version, but also the UK version. And then we also have to make sure we're listing the UK version, noting that this is the UK version, as well as the English and US version. The order of the URLs within the XML sitemap doesn't usually matter. However, It's usually best and usually recommended to keep them in the same order throughout the sitemap just for QA and troubleshooting purposes. So again, this method is fairly simple, something that we do recommend across a handful of our clients, as well as the on-page method. And then just jumping in to show the importance and impact of correct hreflang as well as site structure here. So we had a client who migrated from parameters. And if you can remember in one of the first slides, we talked about how parameters are not a recommended method just due to sending low geolocation signals to Google. So they did move from a parameter structure to a subdirectory. We did see immediate organic traffic improvement after the first week of implementation, with some contributing factors being hreflang implementation that was correctly done, as well as updating that URL structure. So if you can see there, they saw an overall 10% increase in organic traffic year over year and an 8% increase in organic conversions. I can pass it back over to Katie.
Great. So once those technical foundation, once that's laid, we want to make sure that we're also thinking about our on-page considerations as well and how we can optimize for international here. So first and foremost, conducting our in-language keyword research. So as I mentioned earlier, at the highest level, we think of, at least in our international US market compared to the UK market, as a sweater, the same thing. However, the way that we speak to them in these markets is very different. So as you can see in that top chart there, in the UK, a keyword like women's jumper sees about 12,000 searches every month, whereas sweater is searched significantly less. In the US, you'll see almost the complete flip, with women's jumper seeing about 4,000 searches each month and women's sweater seeing over 18,000. So it's going to be really important to ensure that your sites are optimized for these keywords that are going to drive the most traffic. However, it's not standard across the board. So what you'll see in our example here, this being ASOS's site, they're applying those learnings to copy optimizations and ensuring that it's not one standard site across the board. The top example is a snippet from their UK site where you can see that they're very clearly optimizing to cardigans and jumpers. Conversely, in the US, they're optimizing towards sweaters. So taking those learnings around what is going to drive the most traffic and also show the most relevance for search engines that are crawling these sites. So not only are they gaining visibility because they're targeting the correct keywords, but ultimately they're speaking to consumers in a way that resonates with them. They're going to feel like they recognize their own language on the UK site, whereas in the US, someone may see jumper and say, I have no idea what that is. Is this a new trend? I don't know. So again, make sure you're resonating with your audience and taking these things into account. However, the optimizations don't stop there. So around the springtime, even though the ASOS is a UK-based company, they recognize that there's different heavily promoted holidays around the world. So on this slide here, we're looking at ASOS's Iraq website, where Ramadan is a more prominently celebrated holiday. They also utilize more conservative imagery on the site throughout its promotions and reference this top of mind in the hero image on their site. So they're really taking their optimizations a step forward to resonate with their audiences in that area, in this case Iraq, to ensure that they're just making their site more dedicated to the audience it's supposed to go after. In the same time frame, if you take a look at their UK site, they're promoting the Easter holiday, which is much more widely observed in the UK than in a place like Iraq. So they're promoting sales for the Easter holiday, as well as showing influencers that are more notable in the UK region and will resonate with consumers in terms of what they may want to buy on the site versus speaking to something they may not necessarily care about or resonate with as much. So making sure you're taking those optimizations one step further from just optimizing for specific keywords, but really taking cultural relevance into account and applying that throughout your site and the content that you're showing. So Alice and I covered a lot in this section here, just some key takeaways to make sure we're grounding ourselves and ultimately what's going to matter for your site optimizations. Start by monitoring performance. Throughout today's talk, we mentioned making sure that you have concrete goals established is going to be really important. Ensure that you're monitoring that performance to goals and in getting ahead of any kind of leading indicators where there may be potential problems with how your site is set up from a technical standpoint or optimized from a copy standpoint. Additionally, utilize those geographical reports in your performance platforms to gain an understanding if there are those problems. So take it that step further and do your research. Conduct in-language keyword research to ensure it's reviewed by a native speaker before publishing to avoid any kind of mess ups with copy recommendations. And then lastly, ensure you're taking cultural and regional differences into account when writing site copy and launching marketing campaigns. So in conclusion, a lot covered here today, but ultimately, what should you be walking away with from our talk? Utilize competitor insights and search trends to determine the opportunity in these international markets. Get to know where you should be investing. Where's the most opportunity to see a return on your investment? Start there. Combine qualitative and quantitative data sources to develop a robust strategy. Ensure that you're putting these two together to find that intersection of where you can understand your customers, but are also backing all of your recommendations in what you know the data is demonstrating to be successful. And lastly, monitor performance closely of your international site. Ensure you're checking in on the technical setup as well as on-page optimizations to ensure that they're doing what you intend them to do, ultimately driving traffic and laddering up to those goals.
All right. Well, thank you, Allison and Katie, for this wonderful webinar presentation today. For those of you, our attendees, thank you so much for joining us. Before we jump into the Q&A, I want to just put a quick reminder up on the screen. Please sign up, subscribe to SEER, find all things SEER, weekly, monthly industry updates, helpful tips, and much more really awesome resources we send out, so make sure to sign up. Also, learn with SEER. Continue leveling up your digital strategy with our blog and resources. We put out new blogs and resources weekly, so feel free to check out, download these resources and leverage them how you please. And lastly, reach out. Partner with SEER, view our marketing services, contact us, learn more about what we offer. Feel free to book a personal meeting with me. Again, my name is Chase. I'm on the marketing team here at SEER, and I would love to talk to you. 15 minutes won't take much of your time, and we can hash through some of your challenges there. But enough of me. Let's jump into some Q&A. Thank you for the folks that asked some questions here. So let's jump right in. I'll ask, and then Allison, Katie, feel free to jump in. So the first question we have, how long will it take / can you anticipate to see the results after launching internationally?
I can jump in here. So as far as how long it will take, if you remember from one of the case study slides that we covered in the technical SEO section, after implementing a new URL structure in hreflang, one of our clients saw results almost immediately, like a week after implementation. However, it is tough to say exactly how long that you'd be able to potentially see results, just because we can't gauge how often Google's crawling and accessing your website. Also, things as far as website size will play a factor in this, overall changes. So if you did have a previous international setup, and maybe you're going through and making changes or redirecting URLs, it could take a little bit longer of a time for Google to detect all of those old URLs and follow those redirects. So different factors, again, as I mentioned, as far as size and complexity of what you're changing may have an impact. So again, there's really no I guess, set time. I would say anywhere from weeks to, a couple months.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Allison. All right. Are there any pros and cons in investing in an agency versus an in-house team to support expansion?
I can also jump in here too. And Katie, feel free if you have anything to add after I'm done. As far as some pros and cons, I think pros as far as utilizing agencies is obviously having that subject matter expertise, as well as able to work through large data sets and help really establish a strong foundation for your international content. However, one thing that we do find is that a lot of international websites or international content is hosted and managed almost separately by the clients. So you might have a lot of different teams that are involved with working across international sites and who's touching what website, which might get a little busy or crazy for an agency to stay on top of. So I think it's ultimately dependent upon how you have it set up within your internal business and overall how you have the team structured as far as who's responsible for updating what on what websites and their level of access to that agency, or if it makes more sense for them just to manage that in-house and then maybe have the agency only touch a couple of the websites.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is kind of a theme throughout the presentation we just had around making sure you have boots on the ground. So whether that's an agency that you're handling strategy in-house, but perhaps working with an agency in the region you're working in, or vice versa, it's going to be really important that you have some facet of your team in that specific region, market area to help with ultimately implementation, translation, etc. So really making sure that you're taking that into account when making that decision is going to be important.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Again, Katie, Allison, and thank you so much to all of the attendees today. Again, this session was recorded, so we will make sure that it ends up in your inbox. Check it out by the end of the day. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Again, my name is Chase. I would love to connect with you. My email is chasef@seerinteractive.com. Feel free to reach out and feel free to send me any questions if you happen not to get to them, or if you think of them later on. We appreciate it. So thank you again for joining today's webinar, and we'll see you all again shortly.